Good evening and welcome again to Spiritual Story Time. I'm Domo Geshe and hoping that you had a lovely day, something peaceful, something exciting, a lovely mixture of the two. I certainly did. Today was just a beautiful sunny day and took the two chihuahuas for a long walk and trying to drag Sunny away from looking for voles and poking about in muddy places. And Lily down by the pond, a frog jumped and she took off like a bolt of lightning. So very different personalities. It was so funny. She didn't stop running until she got to the front door. So hope your day was nice. Here's our storybook, Tibetan Folk Tales, and I'm thinking I'm going to read two short stories this evening for you. The first one is called The Castle in the Lake. In the land of Tibet, there was a beautiful lake surrounded by hills and mountains. So beautiful and clear was the lake that people who passed by would gasp in wonderment. Some would say that when the sun was high in the sky, casting the shadows of the mountain peaks across the calm expanse of water, it looked just as if there was a castle in the lake, a castle of such vast proportions that it filled the water. So the lake soon came to be known as the Castle Lake. Many stories grew up around the lake and its castle. Sometimes it was said that when the moon shone full and the stars gleamed like diamonds in the water, people could be seen rising from the lake, strange people with eyes of fire and flowing hair hanging like wet leaves around their faces. Or fiery dogs would appear to tear the flesh from lone travelers walking the beach in innocence. But, as it is often the case with legends, father told daughter and mother told son through many generations, until the stories grew bigger and bigger with each telling, and finally they conveyed much more than the original teller intended. Soon it was generally accepted that there was indeed a castle in the lake and that the castle had a king. The king, it was said, had many retainers, men who by some misfortune had fallen into the lake or who had been captured while walking alone on its shores and were thereafter forced to remain in the service of the king. One day, a young herdsman was tending his yaks on the eastern side of the lake. Feeling a need for refreshment, he left his herd and made his way down to the water's edge. After he had splashed the cooling water onto his face, he lay back against a large rock, took his cheese and barley bread from his bag, lit a small fire to heat up his butter tea, and began to have his lunch. While he was eating, Rinpoche began to reflect upon his life. His mother was a cruel woman. She forced him to work hard so that she could buy new clothes and eat well, while he had to be content with a few cast-off rags and the scraps of food his mother did not want. Thinking thus, Rinpoche began to cry. The tears rolled down his cheeks and sobs shook his body. He could work no harder, and yet his mother wanted more and more. As the boy began to pack away his things, he looked up and saw a man standing at the water's edge. The man was tall and dressed in a black chuba, dripping with water, looking just as if he had come up out of the lake. Recalling the stories he heard about the Castle Lake and the king's retainers, Rinpoche began to panic and was just starting to run away when the man spoke. "Why do you cry so?" the man asked. Rinpoche turned to the man and saw that his face was gentle and kind, and heard that his voice was soft and melodious. All fear seemed to leave his body, and he walked toward the tall man, standing in the shallows of the lake. The man repeated his question, and Rinchen told him about his mother and how she forced him to work harder and harder in order to keep her. "Come with me into the lake," the man said, "for the king is a kind man and may be able to help you with your problem." The young herdsman felt fear begin to well inside him once more, for he was sure that if he went into the lake, he would never return. The tall man sensed the boy's fear, but in gentle tones, which felt like music to his ears, he persuaded the young herdsman that he need not fear for his life. "I am one of the king's retainers," said the man. "I will take you to see him and see that you return safely." The young herdsman thought for a moment. "What have I got to lose? My mother is so cruel that even death would be better than spending the rest of my life in her bondage." And so, throwing his fear away, Rinchen followed the king's retainer into the lake. The water was warm and friendly, and the boy was surprised that he could breathe quite freely. The king's retainer asked him to close his eyes as he led the boy through the water to the castle. When they stopped and Rinchen opened his eyes, he saw that he was standing in a large hall, elaborately decorated in gold, shining silver, and beautiful shell. At the end of the hall was a throne, and on the throne sat an old man, the king. The king beckoned to the boy to come forward, and as he did so, Rinchen noticed that he was not alone in the room with the king and his retainer, for standing on each side of the throne were more retainers, dressed in black chubas, just like the tall man who met him on the shore of the lake. When he reached the foot of the king's throne, one of the retainers sprang forward and placed a small stool in front of the throne for the boy to sit on. Nervously, Rinchen sat down and looked up into the watery blue eyes of the king. "Why do you come here?" asked the king in a deep voice, which resembled the distant rumbling of thunder. The boy told the king his story, just as he had related it to the retainer on the shores of the lake. The king listened, and when Rinchen had finished his story, he turned toward his group of retainers and motioned for one of them to come to him. The retainer approached the king and bent low while the king whispered instructions into his ear. The young herdsman strained but could not hear what the king was saying. The retainer left the hall and returned a few minutes later with a dog. "Take this dog," said the king to the young herdsman, "but take care that you feed it before you feed yourself. That is very important." Rinchen took the dog and with eyes closed let himself be led to the shores of the lake. When he opened his eyes, he was alone with the dog. The young herdsman went home with the dog, and from that day on, everything he desired appeared before him. He would wake up in the morning and find that barley had been placed in the barley chest, butter in the butter chest, and money in the money chest. Even new clothes appeared in his clothes chest. He was very happy and always took great care of the dog, heeding the king's instructions to always feed it before feeding himself. Rinchen's mother was amazed that her son should suddenly become so wealthy, and one day she decided to go out with the herd of yaks to see if she could discover the source of infinite plenty. While his mother was out of the house, the young herdsman decided to watch the dog, for he was curious and wanted to know how the animal managed to produce the money and food. Hiding himself in the house, he watched the dog as it entered the door, walked over to the hearth, and violently began shaking itself. Suddenly, the dog's skin fell to the ground, revealing a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman Rinchen had ever seen. The woman went to the barley chest, opened the lid, and placed in in it the barley, which appeared from nowhere. Then she did the same with the butter chest, the tea chest, and the money chest, going all about the house, producing everything that the boy and his mother needed. Rinchen could contain himself no longer. He seized the dog's skin and threw it into the fire. The beautiful woman begged him not to do so, but it was too late. The skin burned quickly and was soon just a pile of ashes. Frightened that the chief's son would see the woman and take her for his wife, Rinchen covered her face with soot to hide her beauty and kept her in the house away from the eyes of the people. Soon the young herdsman grew very rich, and with his wealth he grew exceedingly bold. Why do I worry, he thought. I have much money. The chief's son will not dare to steal the woman from me, for I can buy weapons and men. Thinking thus, Rinchen washed the soot from the beautiful woman's face and took her into town to show her to the people, for he was very proud of her beauty. The chief's son was in the town and saw the woman. He was determined that she should become his wife and sent his men to fetch the woman to him. The young herdsman was distressed and called upon the men of the town to help him, but they were too afraid of the chief and his son, and not one man would come forward to help Rinchen save his woman. Feeling very sad, the young herdsman went down to the shore of the lake, sat down by the large rock, and began to cry. Just as before, the king's retainer appeared. "Why do you weep this time?" he asked. "I have lost my woman," the boy replied, and told the whole story of how he had burned the dogskin and kept the beautiful woman hidden from the eyes of the people by covering her face in soot. But growing bold, he washed her face, showing her beauty to the chief's son, and so lost her forever. The retainer asked him to follow him into the lake again, for the king needed to hear this story. Perhaps, said the retainer, the king may be able to help you again. The young herdsman soon found himself in front of the throne once more at the feet of the king of the lake. After he heard the story of how Rinchen had lost the beautiful woman, the king gave him a small wooden box. "Take this box," the king said, holding it out to the young herdsman. The boy took the box from the king. "Now," the king continued, "go to the top of a high hill and call the chief's son to war. When he has assembled his armies at the base of the hill, open the box and shout, 'Fight!' This the young herdsman did, and when he opened the box and called, 'Fight!' thousands of men charged out of the box and defeated the chief's son's soldiers. Rinchen won back his beautiful woman and took her for his wife. He also took half of the chief's lands and became a rich, benevolent leader of the people. The young herdsman also returned the box to the king of the lake, thanking him and living in fruitful contact with him for all his life. Well, well, well. There we go. All the spills and chills. It's very, very interesting. I like the part about the box, and yeah, if all wars could be fought that way without actually hurting anybody anyway. So that was that story. We have time to tell another one here. Well, this might be interesting. This is called The Young Man Who Refused to Kill. Unlike the fellow just before, who was happy that anyway. Once there was a young man named Tashi who was not very skilled in the ways of the world. Try as he might, the young man's father could not make him hunt for food. The son would refuse to take a life and would not even eat the meat that his poor father brought home for the family pot. Tashi had 3 sisters, all of whom had married rich men, and often his father and mother would lament their bad luck, for having been left with a son who would not be able to take care of them in their old age, a son who would not hunt for game or fowl, and who was so meek and mild in his ways. He should have been a monk, his mother would cry, for what good is he to us, this son of ours? When we are old, we will have to beg from our daughters and neighbors to save us from starvation. Such was his parents' constant plaint. But still the boy refused to take a life. All life is sacred, he would say. I cannot kill another living being. One day, Tashi's father insisted that the boy accompanying him on a hunting trip. They walked for many miles, and the father was getting very weary, for it was a poor day, and all he had managed to catch was a small rabbit. The father thought, "It is this son of mine, he brings bad luck." The young man was sitting on a rock, eating his meager ration of fruit and cheese, and carving the prayer of Chenrezig into the rock beside him. Om Mani Padme Hum. All along the path, there were similar prayers carved into the rocks by travelers, for the path led up to a holy shrine which would be visited by travelers as they passed on their way. Chenrezig, the patron saint of Tibet, Lord of Compassion, commanded a great devotion from the people, and even Tashi's father, when he saw what his son was doing, silently mouthed the powerful prayer over and over again, moving the worn beads of his rosary through his fingers as he did so. Taking life was against his Buddhist belief, but he had to provide his wife with food, and he did try to kill the animals as humanely as possible, praying for them as he did so. It was plain to the father that he would never make his son see sense. The boy would never take a life, no matter how hungry they were, and he could see no way out of the situation. Father and son walked on a little further, the father keeping a watch out for, for small animals and birds. Suddenly, through the trees, the father saw a sight that made him catch his breath. There in the field that bordered their path, he saw a large hare. It was indeed the best thing that had come his way for many a week, and he was determined not to miss it. Taking up his sling, the father crept through the trees to get a better view of the large brown animal. The hare was running toward them, his powerful hind legs pushing him forward at such a rate that it was impossible for the father to get a clean aim. Suddenly, the hare stopped, as if sensing there was danger. He twitched his nose, turned his head from side to side, and pricked his ears, listening. He was so near now that the boy could see the hare quite clearly, and so could his father, who was just ready to send a large stone flying from his sling. When the boy stood up and shouted, "No, father, no, do not kill him!" The hare leaped into the air and was gone in a second, running for cover in a barley field, which provided welcome refuge from his angry assailant. The father stood spellbound for a few minutes. His face had turned ashen white, and anger surged through his body. "Why?" he asked his son. "Why did you do that?" Tashi felt uncomfortable. He knew that his father was angrier than he had ever seen him before, and that he could probably expect the beating of his life. The father could control himself no longer. Taking a large rock from the side of the pathway, he walked toward his son. "I will kill you," he said. "I will kill you, my only son." So saying, the father made to throw the rock at Tashi's head, but he backed away, frightened now, and pleading with his father to spare his life. Just on one side of the path was a rocky incline, and on the side of the slope was a small cave. The opening was just a small crack, and the young man backed toward it, just managing to squeeze himself into the cave before his father sent the rock hurtling toward his head. The rock struck his leg, and he screamed out in pain. Once inside the cave, Tashi knew that he was safe, since the opening was far too small for his father to enter. Tashi could not tell how large his rocky prison was, for it was dark and very difficult to see inside the cave. Inching his way along one of the jagged walls, he reached the end of the cave just a few yards away from the entrance, and there, his leg pouring blood, he lay down and soon lapsed into unconsciousness. It was many hours later when Tashi, roused into consciousness by the sound of footsteps, sat up and painfully recalled the events that had led up to his being injured and seeking refuge from his angry father. The footsteps grew louder. He called out for help, but his voice was weak and only a feeble whisper left his lips. Mustering all the energy he could, Tashi called again, this time louder. The footsteps stopped, and he could hear voices softly murmuring outside the cave. Suddenly, a head appeared in the opening. 2 eyes peered in at him, and a voice shouted for him to come out of the cave. "I cannot move," he replied. "I am injured and find it difficult to move the few yards to the opening of the cave." The head disappeared and was soon replaced by another. Then a small robed body maneuvered itself through the crack and crawled along the cave to Tashi. He could see that it was a monk moving toward him with outstretched hands to support him and lead him to safety. Once outside the cave, Tashi saw there were 3 monks traveling together on pilgrimage to the holy shrines. They carried him to a soft bank of grass, set him down, and tended to his leg. Then, after sharing their food with him, the monks asked Tashi to tell them his story, how he had come to be in such a sorry situation. The boy related his tale, telling them about how his unwillingness to hunt for food, and how finally his father, driven to despair, had tried to kill his only son. The monks listened without speaking. Then the head monk invited the boy to accompany them on their travels. This he did, dressed in the robes of a mendicant monk. After a few days, they came to the house of Tashi's eldest sister. The head monk approached the door, knocked, and when the sister appeared, asked for alms. The sister went to fetch food for the wandering monks, but just as they were leaving, she asked, "Have you seen my lost brother on your travels? He has been missing for many days, and we are worried about him." The head monk replied that they had not met with her brother on the way, but if they did, they would surely tell him of her concern. The eldest sister did not recognize her brother, dressed in the robes of a monk. Soon they came upon the house of the young man's second sister. Once again, the head monk approached the house and asked for alms, which he was given, and once again he was asked whether or not they had met with the lost brother. The head monk replied that they had not met with the young man, and they went on their way. When they came to the house of Tashi's youngest sister to ask for alms, she immediately recognized her lost brother and hugged him, begging him to stay with those who loved him. The 3 sisters gathered at the youngest sister's house, and a feast was held to celebrate Tashi's return. The monks were given many gifts and were asked to stay as guests for as long as they pleased, but they declined and left the youngest sister's house to resume their travels. Tashi thanked his sisters for their help and concern, but asked them to give him their blessings, for he wanted to leave and make a life of his own. The sisters were sad to see their only brother go out into the world, and they gave him a gift of a magic horse who could speak. Tashi took the horse and made his way toward the remote regions of the land. Before he had gone very far, Tashi came to a vast plain. The horse spoke to him. "Kill me," he said. "Put my skin on the plain and scatter my hair all around so that the wind will carry it to the far corners of the plain." The young man was horrified and refused to kill the horse. Instead, he sat down his pack, ate the food his sisters had given him, and prepared to rest for the night. During the night, the horse threw himself over a steep precipice and was instantly killed. When Tashi woke the next morning, he looked for the horse, but he was nowhere to be seen. Searching all over the plain, the young man came to the precipice and, peering down, saw the shattered body of his horse. Feeling a great sadness and thinking of their conversation the night before, Tashi decided to do what the horse had asked. He took the skin, spread it out in the center of the plain, then scattered the horse's hair all around, throwing it up into the air so that the wind caught it and carried it to the farthest corners of the plain. Instantly, the horse's skin became a huge mansion, and the hair became herds of sheep and yaks, grazing on the plain as far as the eye could see. The horse appeared before the boy and spoke once more. "You have shown only compassion toward other living beings. This is your reward." As soon as he had spoken, the horse galloped off into the distance and disappeared. The young man noticed that where the horse's hooves had touched the ground, little patches of gold appeared. Looking around his new home, Tashi thought about his parents and wondering how they were managing to survive. He decided to go and see them and bring them home to live with him in the mansion. "My father and mother will never want for food again," he thought. Tashi dressed in monk's robes again, for he did not want his parents to know of his newfound wealth. Then he packed 2 bread pancakes and made his way to his parents' home. He climbed onto the roof of their house, peered down through a small window, and saw his mother and father crouched in front of the fire. Tashi threw down a bread pancake. His mother seized it, declaring, "Gifts from heaven!" The father snatched it from her and began to eat greedily. Tashi threw down the second pancake for his mother. Then Tashi climbed down from the roof and knocked on the door of his parents' house. His mother answered and immediately recognized her son. Taking him into her arms, she hugged him and begged him not to leave them again. The young man's father, too, was overcome with emotion and asked his son's forgiveness. Tashi told his parents about his new home and his wealth and took them with him to the mansion on the plain. There he set his mother on a throne of purest gold, his father on a throne of purest silver, and he, their only son, sat on a throne of the pinkest shell. I'll read the note here at the end. It said, "A Tibetan will sometimes purchase an animal from a butcher and it will be allowed to live out its natural life, wearing a red woolen collar to show its special status. The owner believes this meritorious act may go a little way toward balancing out the often repeated unmeritorious act of eating meat. In a cold climate where meat production is easy and growing of crops and vegetables can be difficult, meat was one of the staples of the Tibetan diet. But Tibetans did not delude themselves as to its incompatibility with Buddhist teachings on harmlessness to all living creatures. Hence the often repeated invocation, If an animal's flesh be eaten by one of merciful mind, it will be led on the road of pure and perfect mercy in future lives. Being human, though, Tibetans have frailties of nature, as do all of us, so the popular attitude is that the main responsibility lies with the butcher. So interestingly, you may know that sometimes in Dharamsala, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives, that people will buy an animal, a cow or sheep, from the butcher, and that is offered to His Holiness, and he has an entire herd of these rescued animals that wander the hillsides of near Dharamsala, and they have their own shepherds to care for them. So this is an interesting way of saving lives. In the book I'm writing on karma, in fact, just today I talked about merit making for long life, to produce long life, and one way is rescuing small animals, birds, fish, turtles, worms, and releasing them. So these are really lovely things that we can do. Have a lovely rest of the evening. Good night, and see you tomorrow evening for spiritual story time.